Welcome to A Dose of Feel Good. I'm your host, Whitney Bischoff, and today we are talking about kicking imposter syndrome in the face. You can see full show notes at doseoffeelgood.my.canva.site. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to A Dose of Feel Good. We are at episode 34 today, and we are rounding out 2025 this week, which seems actually a little wild. I recently went to a show here in town. I'm a big theater buff. Was a theater kid all growing up, and our two directors at my high school are retiring, so shout out to them. But I got to see a bunch of people that I did theater with, one of my good friends, and we were just talking about, looking through all of the old photos and theater posters, all of that fun stuff. And we realized that it has been, I think we were at almost 15 years. And I'm like, I don't even feel old enough to be that way, but that's true. And another year has come and gone. And it's just that reminder that we are all growing and evolving and becoming the best version, or at least the adult version of ourselves, which I say is definitely the best version. But that's really where our topic comes from this week, is about imposter syndrome and going into 2026 and saying that we're just going to kick imposter syndrome in the face and not let it have a hold on us, maybe that has felt that way previously. And as I was doing some research for this week, I was looking at, the concept of imposter syndrome. When I was telling one of my friends that this was the topic for this week, they were like, have you ever had imposter syndrome? And in the back of my head, I was like, I feel like everyone has at some point or another, right? But then I did some research, and apparently up to 85% of people will experience imposter syndrome at some point in their life. And the other 15%, I'm convinced, might have some narcissistic qualities, because I feel like we've all been to that point of like, do I actually know what I'm doing? And so the definition of imposter syndrome is persistently doubting our abilities or our accomplishments even. And I think we definitely live in this world where we just have this constant comparison. But it's so odd to me because I often find myself telling other people, I wish you could see you the way I see you, because we do admire what so many people in our lives bring to the plate. But it's really difficult for us to maybe see those same qualities in ourselves or recognize that those are skills and traits and strengths that we have that we bring to the table. But we tend to minimize those when it's ourselves. And that's that imposter syndrome talking. So it's not just doubting our own abilities in situations. It's also our accomplishments and attributing to them to something other than ourselves getting us to that point. And so I found myself thinking, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where we minimize our own skills and talents? And we frame, when we do have those wins, we frame it as luck rather than all the hard work that we've put in or things like that. And I think it comes from a variety of things. I think societal pressure is a huge component to that. Just wanting to be the best version. And again, I know I've said this in previous episodes, but we see the best version either on social media or any type of media. It's that highlight reel. And so we are constantly maybe doubting ourselves in the reality of the moments of where we are. And so it's like, I don't have myself together as much as maybe everybody else does. And the truth is, though, that none of us really have it together, right? We're all living in our own reality, which looks different for every single person. And so it allows us to take a second and realize that like it's part of maybe our personality, just those inner strengths or traits that we're born with. But it's also this how we were maybe brought up, what those environments looked like for us. But then the current environment that we are in, and I think that's a huge piece of having like friends and family that are supportive makes a big difference. Or even, I think, talk a lot about workplaces that are supportive, right? And so if we live in these spaces or these environments that are making us question who we are, that's a real piece. I think this also, when you take a step back, I joke all the time in my work that apparently I'm an adult now and I'm supposed to have it all figured out. But I took a step back of like really thinking of like parents or the adults in your life that, I think when we were younger, we're like, oh, they have it all put together. They know how this is supposed to go. And the reality is a lot of the time, no one teaches them of like how to approach life or how to maybe teach those skills in somebody else. And yet they figured it out. They made it. They are now the older adults of the world. I was making a joke with somebody. They're the adultier adults, which is funny when we're talking about imposter syndrome, because what makes an adultier adult? My friend that I was talking to, they were like, so you're calling me old? No, they're the people who have it all together. Which, again, it's that imposter syndrome. We don't. But I think we have this recognition as we get older that the adults in our lives when we were young also didn't have it together. And apparently we're now those adults that are supposed to be passing along those things when we don't know how it's all supposed to go either. So I think this comes from, recognizing it first in ourselves of what does that imposter syndrome actually look like. So it might be, doubting our skills, having this real fear of success or failure in that, thought process of, do I measure up to maybe how somebody else might be working or looking at me? I think to then react to that, we often find ourselves overworking to prove our worth. We question our place in certain spaces. We have this wonder about how come they have it all together. And again, really coming down to doubting our worth. And I think that often comes from just feeling slightly different, right? That like, well, they have it all together. So what am I doing wrong in this space? But I think the truth is that so many people are admiring you and what you bring to the plate. And so when we think of, we're measuring ourselves against somebody else who has it all together, those might be the same people that are admiring you and recognizing how you show up in those spaces and what you bring to the table. And I think when we're thinking about this is often something that we've all been faced with. We've all, been there or might get to that space at some way or time, but we can literally choose to respond with kicking it in the face. And we're going to talk about what that means to actually do that, especially when we get to those places where we're really doubting ourselves. But I want to give a couple of stories first. So I recently ended my presidency of South Dakota Higher Education Association, but I was thinking back, probably about 4 years ago was the first time I presented at this statewide conference, and ironically, my topic, I can't remember exactly what I was talking about, but it had something to do with imposter syndrome, and I remember presenting. I love talking in front of people, so I was not nervous at all. I had practiced it a couple times. And to be very honest, I was in a very unhealthy work environment. And so I had this thought in the back of my head of, I have to do it perfectly or it's going to get back to XYZ. And then I'm going to be in trouble or looked down on or whatever that looks like. And we all want to impress the people that we're working with or for. And so I remember starting this and I was like, I have it. And I just totally blanked. Like that moment where I had no idea. I would look at the slide and it was like my brain wasn't even really connecting the dots. And I remember, pausing, taking a breath, and, I felt the tears were coming. Like it was just this like utter disappointment in myself. And ironically, again, I was talking about imposter syndrome and I just stopped and I was like, this is what it actually looks like in practice. That, was doubting, what did I have to bring to the table to other professionals in the room? Why should they listen to me? And that was the dialogue that was going through my head. And I just remember literally pausing, stating out loud, and showing the audience that this is what it looks like to stop, pause, and reframe. And we can do that in our head in those moments. I also was presenting at a conference just in the last year, and they were hosting a women's panel of working in higher education, a very authentic panel, which I really appreciated. But the number of women in that room that I was like, oh, you would be the leaders that people would look up to. Like, you could just kind of tell. And the number of people that out loud said, like, I question whether I belong here, or whether I have a place here, or XYZ. And so it was really validating again that, like, we're not the only people who have those thoughts or have those moments, and the people that, you know, look on the outside like they have it all figured out and have it all together often are experiencing those same doubts. And so I think when we think of like that concept of you don't have to prove your worth, I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, those fears of not being enough have been validated, whether that's in our work environments, home environments, upbringing, or even just society as a whole. Like, unfortunately, those fears have been validated at some point. And so it makes it feel like it's the reality. But the reality is that we all bring beautiful gifts to the plate that no one else can. And just that validation that literally no one has it figured out. So when we choose to kind of reframe those thoughts and realize that we bring a lot to the table, we are starting to truly kick imposter syndrome in the face, and we say, you don't have a place at the table here anymore. And I think that starts, one, again, I am a big connector. I am an extrovert. I love talking to people. And so I will often start with making sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who celebrate us and what we bring to the table. And when we get that outside validation, it starts to change that narrative, right? That those fears maybe have been validated in unhealthy systems. And so if we rebuild our connections so that they are much more healthy and we have people around us who are celebrating us, it changes that narrative, that deep intrinsic thought of, maybe I'm not worthy here. And so having that outside validation, because sometimes it's hardest to give ourselves that validation. So surrounding yourself with people who are your biggest cheerleaders and remind you of those strengths that you bring to the plate. And then I think we can do that more intrinsic evaluation of how do I then move forward and change and reframe these thoughts? How do I actually start to, do a knockout punch to this imposter syndrome that just keeps kind of weighing me down? And I think it starts with understanding that how you talk to yourself matters. If you catch yourself being super negative or, recognizing or nitpicking every little thing that you're doing that for yourself. When other people do that to you, it doesn't feel great. So know that the way you talk to yourself really does matter. And that's why affirmations really work. They sound super cheesy. They sound silly, but really it's that how you talk to yourself matters, and you can choose to change that narrative and recognize maybe when you're being more negative about what you bring to the table. I also think it's super helpful to bring out that inner sass or that like feisty attitude that's like, no, these thoughts or this imposter syndrome is not going to have a place here. And so then when we decide to kind of bring that little gut punch, if you will, we reframe each of those negative thoughts in comments that, thinking about if you were to hear those same comments that you make about yourself to maybe a friend or a family member, you'd be mad. Like, you would have something to say. So treat yourself with that same level of feisty attitude that you would give if you were hearing those things about somebody else, because how you talk to yourself really does matter. And the more that we reframe those thoughts, right, the more that we are kind of knocking it in the face, our confidence grows. And it grows then when we're able to share and acknowledge our own wins and our own strengths, right? So rather than needing maybe that external validation, we have changed that thought process internally, but we're also sharing that with others. And we're celebrating who we are, what we bring to the plate, and that we all have that special place that only we can fill. So our few call to action items this week. First, if you haven't, I highly recommend identify what your strengths are, whether you're kind of coming up with those on the top of your head, or you can do any type of like personality assessment. Like, what are those personality traits that come to the top of mind when someone maybe thinks of you, or ask friends and family, like, what are my strengths, and identify what those are. I think also it's helpful, create 3 go-to affirmations that really speak to you. That way, when you are kind of stuck in that negative self-talk loop, you can reach into these affirmations and remind yourself that in that moment, maybe when we had more a healthy thought process, that this is how I actually think of myself, and this is what I actually bring to the table. I also think that it's helpful to maybe reach out and acknowledge an inner trait in somebody else. So, we might be yearning for that external validation, but when we can give that external validation to somebody else, it shows, oh, I can see what's best in somebody else, and they might need that as well. And then lastly, and I know it's really hard, especially as a Midwest girly, brag about yourself. Brag about what you bring to the plate and that nobody else can fill that space that you fill. And I don't think it's rude or anything like that, but it shows that like we actually have a place at the table and in that space. So with that, that is going to round out our week. I guess when in doubt, you can always do, just envision the imposter syndrome is like in front of you, and do like, actually envision punching it in the face or kicking it in the face, whatever tickles your fancy. Speaking of these call to action items, I wanted to kind of do a shout out that if you want to follow Dose of Feel Good on Patreon, I am giving out a toolkit each week. So it's not just, listening to these call to action items. It's a 1-page, either picture or PDF that you can download and complete. So we're actually putting these action items into practice and changing our lives and where we are in those moments. Also super exciting. I launched our Dose of Feel Good podcast merchandise this week. So have some fun little sayings that are kind of the go-to feel good items. We have a couple of different shirt options, a hat, a water bottle, some mugs, either a wine or coffee tumbler, however you view it. So check those out. I think they're super fun, and a really great way to start out 2026 with that reminder that we can feel good if we, choose to put in those action items. So, with that, we're going to wrap up our episode this week. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you are feeling ready to conquer the week and let your impact ripple out to the world around you. Let's connect on Instagram and Threads at Dose of Feel Good Podcast. If you're loving the podcast, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button and leave a review. Until next time, share your own dose of feel good and never underestimate the power of positivity.